On my birthday, my wealthy grandfather grinned. How are you using your $3,400,000 trust fund? I blinked, stunned. What trust fund? My parents looked like they were about to throw up. He turned toward them and asked, "Where did the money go?" My parents dragged me to a fancy restaurant for my 25th birthday, the kind where prices are a whispered secret and waiters wear suits better than most grooms. I just thought it was an awkward celebration. Instead, it was the night my entire life shattered, exposing a betrayal I never saw coming. The air was thick with the clinking of expensive silverware and the faint scent of old money. But under the polished facade, my mom, Eleanor, was practically vibrating with nervous energy, her foundation caked on thick to hide what I now suspect was more than an accidental elbow. Dad, Robert, kept his smile tight, almost forced. This wasn't us. Our birthdays usually involved a chain restaurant and Mom's coupons. Grandpa Arthur arrived 15 minutes late, his silver Mercedes pulling up to the valet stand like he owned the place. He probably could've. He'd made his fortune in commercial real estate back in the 70s and never looked back. His custom-tailored suit, his watch that cost more than my car, his smile that could light up a room. "There's my favorite granddaughter," he announced, pulling me into a hug that smelled like expensive cologne and peppermint. "I'm your only granddaughter, Grandpa," I reminded him, laughing. "That makes me the default favorite." He winked, settled into his chair, and immediately flagged down a waiter for his usual scotch. 25 years old, he mused. "Can you believe it, Robert? Seems like yesterday we were teaching her to ride a bike." Dad just smiled. Time flies. Mom fidgeted with her napkin, constantly checking her phone, barely touching her wine. Dinner progressed with polite small talk. Grandpa Arthur asked about my job at the nonprofit where I coordinated donations for homeless shelters. The pay was terrible, but the work mattered. I'd been eating ramen and sharing a studio apartment with my best friend, Maya, for 4 years just to make ends meet. "You're doing important work," Grandpa Arthur said, cutting into his steak. "Always been proud of how you turned out, sweetheart. You've got a good heart, just like your grandmother, Grace, did." Grandma Grace had passed away when I was 12. I still missed her terribly. Speaking of which, Grandpa Arthur continued, setting down his fork with a satisfied smile. "Now that you're 25, I've been meaning to ask, how do you spend your $3,400,000 trust fund?" The table went silent. Dead silent. Like someone had pressed a mute button on reality. I blinked at him, confused. "What trust fund?" Grandpa Arthur's smile faltered. "The trust fund your grandmother and I set up for you when you were born. It became accessible when you turned 21, but we set up quarterly statements to be sent to your parents' address since that's where you lived during college." The color drained from my mother's face. She looked like she might actually vomit right there on the white tablecloth. Dad's jaw clenched so hard I could hear his teeth grinding from across the table. My heart started pounding. "Grandpa," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I've never seen any statements. I didn't even know there was a trust fund." The temperature at the table seemed to drop 20 degrees. Grandpa Arthur turned slowly to my parents, and his expression transformed from warm grandfather to the ruthless businessman who'd built an empire from nothing. "Where did the money go?" His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "Dad, we can explain," my father started, but his voice cracked. "I'm waiting for that explanation, Robert." Grandpa Arthur's hand tightened around his scotch glass. Mom burst into tears. Actual mascara-running tears. "We were going to pay it back." "Pay what back, Eleanor?" I heard myself ask, though my voice sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. "We borrowed from it," Dad said, not meeting my eyes. "Just a little at first. We had some debts, and the housing market crashed right when we'd invested in that rental property scheme. We were going to lose everything." "So, you stole from your daughter?" Grandpa Arthur's voice could have cut glass. We were going to pay it back, Mom insisted, sobbing into her napkin. We just needed time. The waiter approached to ask about dessert, took one look at our table, and promptly disappeared. How much is left? I asked, my hands shaking. Nobody answered. How much is left? I repeated, louder this time. Dad finally met my eyes. Nothing. It's all gone. The words hit me like a physical blow. $3,400,000 gone. Money I could have used to pay for graduate school without loans. Money I could have used to not live paycheck to paycheck. Money that could have helped me start the nonprofit I'd been dreaming about since sophomore year of college. When you turned 21, Grandpa Arthur said, his voice dangerously calm. You should have received a letter from the trustee explaining everything. Where is that letter? We intercepted the mail, Mom whispered. We thought we'd have time to fix it before she found out. For years, I said, doing the math in my head. I've been scraping by for 4 years while you spent my money. It wasn't like that, Dad tried, reaching for my hand. I jerked away from him. Then what was it like, Robert? Grandpa Arthur demanded. Because from where I'm sitting, you committed fraud. That money was in a legal trust with your daughter as the sole beneficiary. You had no right to touch a single penny. The rental properties were going to make us rich, Dad said desperately. We would have tripled the money and Chloe would have gotten everything back plus profit. But that's not what happened, is it? Grandpa Arthur's expression was carved from ice. The properties were in a bad area, Mom said between sobs. The tenants kept destroying them. We lost more money trying to fix everything. Then Robert's business started struggling, and we used some of it to keep the company afloat. Some of it? I asked. Dad had the decency to look ashamed. The business needed capital. I was sure the next quarter would turn things around. What else? Grandpa Arthur demanded. Because $3 million doesn't just disappear into some rental properties and a struggling business. The silence stretched on. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, having some sort of silent conversation that excluded everyone else. There were other expenses, Dad finally admitted. What expenses? I pressed. Your brother's legal fees, Mom blurted out. My brother, Ethan. Of course. Golden child Ethan who could do no wrong. Except apparently he did plenty wrong. He'd gotten into some kind of trouble 2 years ago, but my parents had been vague about the details. They said it was handled and not to worry about it. What did Ethan do? I asked. He was caught embezzling from his employer, Grandpa Arthur said, his jaw tight. I found out through my attorney. Your parents spent nearly $400,000 keeping him out of prison. The hits just kept coming. You spent my money to keep Ethan out of jail? He's your brother? Mom said as if that justified everything. And I'm your daughter. I shot back. Did you think about that when you were stealing from me? We weren't stealing, Dad insisted weakly. We always intended to pay you back. With what money? Grandpa Arthur asked coldly. Your business is barely staying afloat. You've mortgaged your house 3 times. And from what my financial advisor tells me, you're both drowning in debt. I felt dizzy. How long have you known? I asked Grandpa Arthur. I found out this morning, he said, his expression softening when he looked at me. I called the trustee to verify the distribution schedule for your birthday, thinking I'd match whatever you wanted to donate to your homeless shelter. He mentioned he'd been sending the quarterly statements to your parents' address for the past 4 years and hadn't heard from you. He assumed you were satisfied with the investment performance. What investment performance? I asked bitterly. There's nothing left to perform. The trustee noticed irregular withdrawal patterns 2 years ago and tried to contact you, Grandpa Arthur continued, but the phone number on file was your parents' landline. They told him you were traveling abroad and would call back. You never did, of course, because you didn't know about any of it. I turned to my parents. These two people I'd loved and trusted my entire life. How could you do this to me? We were desperate, Mom pleaded. You don't understand the pressure we were under. So, you made me desperate instead, I said. I thought about all the times I'd called them crying about not being able to afford groceries. All the times I'd asked if I could move back home to save money, and they'd made excuses about not having space, even though my childhood bedroom sat empty. All the times they'd watched me struggle and said nothing. We're your parents, Dad said. We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head. That money was just sitting there. That money was mine, I said, my voice breaking. Grandma and Grandpa set it up for me. For my future, and you stole it. I'm calling my attorney, Grandpa Arthur said, pulling out his phone. Robert, please, my father begged. Chloe, please. We're family. Family doesn't steal from each other, I said, standing up. My legs felt unsteady, but I managed to grab my purse. Family doesn't lie for 4 years while watching their daughter eat discount ramen for dinner. Where are you going? Mom asked frantically. Away from you. I walked out of that restaurant without looking back. Grandpa Arthur caught up with me at the valet stand, his hand gentle on my shoulder. I'm sorry, sweetheart, he said quietly. I should have checked in with you directly years ago. I thought they were trustworthy. It's not your fault, I said, wiping away tears that wouldn't stop falling. You trusted your son. I trusted them, too. Come stay at my place tonight, he offered. We'll figure this out together. I nodded, not trusting my voice to work properly. The next morning, I woke up in one of Grandpa Arthur's guest rooms, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My phone had 37 missed calls from my parents and texts ranging from apologetic to angry to threatening. Grandpa Arthur was already up, sitting in his study with his attorney, Daniel Lee, who had been handling the family's legal matters for 30 years. Chloe, Daniel Lee greeted me warmly, though his expression was serious. I'm sorry about what happened. Your grandfather filled me in on the details. What are my options? I asked, sitting down across from them. Daniel Lee adjusted his glasses. Well, the trust was a legal document with you as the sole beneficiary. Your parents had no legal authority to access those funds. What they did constitutes embezzlement and fraud. We can pursue criminal charges. They'd go to prison? I asked. Potentially, yes. At minimum, they'd face significant fines and would be required to pay restitution. However, given their current financial situation, recovering a full amount would be unlikely. You'd probably get pennies on the dollar. My stomach churned. What if I don't want to press criminal charges? Then we pursue a civil case, Daniel Lee explained. We sue for the full amount plus damages and interest. The judgment would follow them for the rest of their lives. Any assets they acquire, any income above the poverty threshold would be garnished until the debt is paid. We'd also place liens on their property. Either way, they're ruined, I said quietly. Either way, they face consequences for stealing $3 million from their daughter, Grandpa Arthur corrected firmly. This isn't about revenge, Chloe. It's about accountability. He was right. I knew he was right, but they were still my parents. There's something else, Daniel Lee said, pulling out a folder. I did some digging into their finances last night. Your parents weren't entirely truthful at dinner. What do you mean? The rental property investments, those failed within the first year. They lost about $600,000 on that venture. Your father's business troubles? That's real enough. He's about 2 months from bankruptcy. But the rest of the money didn't go where they said it did. Where did it go? Grandpa Arthur demanded. Daniel Lee spread out bank statements and credit card bills across the desk. Country club memberships, luxury cars, a boat they kept for 8 months before selling at a loss, extensive home renovations, jewelry, designer clothes, trips to Europe and the Caribbean. They were living well above their means and using Chloe's trust fund as their personal piggy bank. I stared at the evidence, feeling nauseous. They told me they couldn't afford to help with my student loans. According to this, Daniel Lee tapped one statement, they spent $40,000 at a luxury resort in St. Bart's the same month you called asking if they could loan you $3,000 for an emergency root canal. I remembered that phone call. I'd been in so much pain I could barely talk. Dad said money was tight and suggested I look into dental schools that needed practice patients. I'd ended up getting the tooth pulled instead because it was cheaper. I want them to pay, I said, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. Not just the money. I want them to understand what they did. Grandpa Arthur nodded approvingly. Then we do this right. Daniel, start with a civil suit. Make it airtight. I want every penny accounted for, every lie documented. And Chloe, you need to cut them off completely. No contact, no negotiation, nothing that could be used against you in court. What about Ethan? I asked. Your brother's an adult, Grandpa Arthur said. He made his choices. They made theirs. None of that is your responsibility. The civil case took 8 months to work through the system. During that time, I moved into one of Grandpa Arthur's rental properties, rent-free. Quit my nonprofit job to work as a consultant for his real estate company at a salary that actually paid my bills and started therapy to deal with the betrayal. My therapist, Dr. Emily Carter, had kind eyes and a direct manner that I appreciated. She didn't sugarcoat things or try to rush me toward forgiveness. You're grieving, she told me during our 3rd session. You lost your parents even though they're still alive. That's a unique kind of pain. She was right. Sometimes I'd see something funny and reach for my phone to text Mom before remembering. Other times I'd wake up from dreams where we were still a normal family and the crushing reality would hit me all over again. Do you think I'm being too harsh? I asked during one session after Ethan had left another voicemail calling me vindictive. Do you think you are? Dr. Carter asked, turning the question back on me. Sometimes they're still my parents. They raised me. They also stole millions of dollars from you and watched you struggle for years without saying a word. Parents who loved their children don't do that. Chloe. The hardest part was explaining to people who didn't know the full story. Coworkers would ask casual questions about family plans for the holidays, and I'd have to give vague answers about being estranged. Some people assumed I was being dramatic or ungrateful. You only get one family, one of Grandpa Arthur's business partners told me at a company dinner. Whatever happened, surely you can work it out. I smiled politely and changed the subject, but inside I was seething. People who'd never been betrayed like this always had opinions about forgiveness. Maya was my rock through everything. She'd moved into Grandpa Arthur's rental property with me, refusing to let me face any of it alone. Your parents suck, she declared one night over pizza 3 months into the lawsuit. Like objectively, scientifically, they are terrible human beings. Tell me how you really feel, I said, laughing despite myself. I'm serious, Chloe. I've known you since freshman year of college. I've watched you donate your last $20 to homeless people while you skipped meals. You're one of the best people I know, and they tried to destroy you. They didn't destroy me, I said quietly. Damn right they didn't. You're too strong for that. The discovery phase of the lawsuit revealed even more disturbing details. Daniel Lee's team found evidence that my parents had been planning to access the trust fund before I was even born. There were letters between my father and his financial advisor discussing strategic asset management related to future family resources. They were counting on that money, Daniel Lee explained, showing me the documents. Your father's business was failing even before you were in kindergarten. They viewed your trust fund as their retirement plan. But it was set up for me, I said, feeling sick. Grandma specifically designated me as the beneficiary. They didn't care. In their minds, family money was communal property. They genuinely believed they had a right to it. The paper trail showed years of financial recklessness. My parents had refinanced their house 6 times. They'd taken out personal loans at predatory interest rates. They'd maxed out credit cards and opened new ones to pay off the old ones. By the time I turned 21 and the trust became accessible, they were drowning in debt with no way out. So, they stole from their daughter. One afternoon, I drove past my childhood home. New owners had already moved in. A young family with 2 small kids playing in the yard. The oak tree where Dad had pushed me on a tire swing was still there, bigger now, its branches reaching toward the sky. I sat in my car across the street, watching those children laugh and play, and wondered if their parents would ever betray them the way mine had betrayed me. Would they steal from them, lie to them, watch them suffer and say nothing? A knock on my window startled me. A police officer stood there, hand resting casually on his belt. "Everything okay, ma'am?" he asked after I rolled down the window. "Yes, sorry. I used to live here. Just feeling nostalgic." His expression softened. "Ah, I get it. Just don't want the new residents to worry about someone casing the place." "Of course. I'm leaving now." As I drove away, I caught one last glimpse in my rearview mirror. The little girl had fallen and scraped her knee. Her mother rushed over, scooped her up, kissed the injury better. Such a small moment of care and protection. I cried the entire drive back to my apartment. The trial date approached and my anxiety skyrocketed. Daniel Lee assured me the case was solid, but I'd have to testify. I'd have to sit in a courtroom and tell strangers how my own parents had betrayed me. "Can't we just settle?" I asked Grandpa Arthur a week before the trial. "They've refused every settlement offer," he reminded me gently. "They want their day in court because they think they can manipulate you into backing down." What if they're right? Grandpa Arthur took my hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "Then you remember why you're doing this. Not just for yourself, but for every young person whose family might try to take advantage of them. You're setting a precedent, Chloe. You're showing that this kind of theft has consequences." The first day of trial, I wore a navy suit Grandpa Arthur had bought me and tried not to throw up in the courthouse bathroom. My parents sat at the defendant's table with their attorney, a weaselly-looking woman who probably knew she was fighting a losing battle. Mom looked older, her hair grayer than I remembered. Dad had lost weight, his suit hanging loose on his frame. For a brief moment, I felt sorry for them. Then I remembered the $40,000 vacation to St. Bart's while I was getting a tooth pulled, and the sympathy evaporated. Their attorney tried to paint them as victims of circumstance, well-meaning parents who'd made mistakes, but always intended to make things right. She brought up every birthday present they'd ever given me, every Christmas, every school event they'd attended. The Blackwoods devoted their lives to raising their daughter, she argued. They provided a stable home, paid for her education, supported her dreams. One financial mistake doesn't erase decades of love and sacrifice. Daniel Lee stood up for cross-examination, and I saw why Grandpa Arthur trusted him so completely. "Miss Peterson, you mentioned the defendants paid for Chloe's education. Can you tell the court how much of her college tuition came from the trust fund established by her grandparents?" The attorney fumbled through her notes. The trust fund was part of the family's overall financial planning." "That's not what I asked. Let me be more specific." According to these bank records, the defendants withdrew $120,000 from Chloe's trust fund in August 2021 with a memo line reading college tuition. But according to Chloe's university records, her tuition that year was $65,000. Where did the other $55,000 go? Silence. Let me help you out, Daniel Lee continued. That same month, the defendants purchased a $28,000 boat and spent $14,000 on furniture from a luxury retailer. The rest went to credit card payments. So, when you say they paid for her education, what you mean is they used her money to pay for her education while simultaneously funding their lifestyle. Objection, their attorney said weakly. Relevance goes to the pattern of behavior, Your Honor, Daniel Lee said. The defendants want credit for parenting duties they funded with stolen money. I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Lee. Daniel Lee methodically dismantled every argument they made. When they claimed they kept me clothed and fed, he showed credit card statements proving they charged groceries to cards they never paid off. When they mentioned the roof over my head, he presented mortgage documents showing they borrowed against the house so many times that the bank technically owned more of it than they did. My father took the stand in his own defense, which Daniel Lee later told me was a terrible idea. Mr. Blackwood, you testified that you always intended to repay your daughter. Can you explain why, if that's true, you never told her about the trust fund? Dad shifted in his seat. We didn't want her to feel entitled. We wanted her to work hard and make her own way. So, your plan was to steal her money, spend it on yourselves, and keep her ignorant of its existence so she'd develop a strong work ethic? It wasn't stealing. We're her parents. Did you believe that being a parent gave you legal authority to access a trust fund where you were explicitly not named as a beneficiary or trustee? Families help each other. So, if Chloe had emptied your retirement accounts without asking, that would have been acceptable family help? Dad's face reddened. That's different. How is it different, Mr. Blackwood? We raised her. We earned a right to what? Commit fraud, forge documents, lie to trustees and attorneys? Please finish that sentence. Dad couldn't. He sat there, mouth opening and closing like a fish, while the judge waited patiently for an answer that never came. My parents tried everything. They showed up at my new apartment until I got a restraining order. They had Ethan call me crying about how I was destroying the family. They even got their pastor involved, who left me voicemails about forgiveness and honoring my mother and father. I blocked them all. The evidence Daniel Lee compiled was damning. Every withdrawal from the trust, every forged signature on documents claiming I'd authorized the transactions, every lie they told the trustee. My parents had been sloppy, probably because they never expected to get caught. When the judge ordered them to pay back the full amount plus interest and legal fees totaling just over $4 million, Mom fainted in the courtroom. Dad just sat there staring at his hands. The defendants will submit a payment plan within 30 days, the judge declared. Failure to comply will result in asset seizure and wage garnishment. This court finds that the plaintiffs have proven their case beyond reasonable doubt, and the defendants' actions constitute a clear breach of fiduciary duty and embezzlement. I felt nothing watching them. No satisfaction, no sadness, just a hollow emptiness where my parents used to be. Outside the courthouse, Grandpa Arthur pulled me aside. You did the right thing. Then why doesn't it feel right? I asked. Because you're a good person who expected the people who raised you to be good people, too. That's not a character flaw, sweetheart. That's why you're nothing like them. The payment plan my parents submitted was laughable. They proposed paying me $200 a month, which meant they'd pay off the debt in approximately 1,667 years. Daniel Lee rejected it immediately. They're not taking this seriously, he told me in his office, tossing the proposal across his desk. They think if they drag this out long enough, you'll give up or they'll find a way to wiggle out of it. So, what do? We push for immediate asset seizure and garnishment. No more negotiations, no more chances. They had 8 months during the lawsuit to come clean and work something out. They chose to fight us at every turn. Watching the asset seizure process was surreal. Court-appointed officials arrived at my parents' house with a detailed inventory list. Everything of value was tagged and photographed. Furniture, electronics, jewelry, artwork, even my mother's collection of antique teacups that she'd always said would be mine someday. I wasn't there in person, but Daniel Lee showed me the documentation. Each item had an estimated value next to it. My childhood home reduced to line items on a spreadsheet. Is this really necessary? I asked, staring at a photo of my mom's teacups, each one wrapped in bubble wrap and packed into boxes. You're not having second thoughts, are you? Grandpa Arthur asked, his tone sharper than usual. No, Those teacups were Grandma Grace's originally. Mom inherited them. And your mother chose to keep pretty teacups while refusing to acknowledge she stole millions from her daughter. Chloe, sentiment is what they're counting on. They want you to feel guilty so you'll back off. He was right, but it still felt awful. The house sold at auction within 6 weeks. A developer bought it for less than market value, planning to flip it. I got the notification from Daniel Lee via email. Proceeds from the sale after mortgage payoff amounted to $87,000, which would be applied to the judgment. $87,000 out of $4 million. It would take decades to collect the full judgment amount, if I ever collected it all. Ethan called me from a number I didn't recognize, so I accidentally answered. Are you happy now? He spat before I could hang up. Mom and Dad are living in a dump, working retail jobs, eating ramen every night. You've destroyed them. They destroyed themselves, I said calmly, though my heart was racing. And me? They destroyed me first. You're fine. Grandpa gave you a cushy job and a free apartment. You're right. I am doing better than I ever was because I worked for it. Because I rebuilt from nothing after they stole everything from me. Where were you when I was eating ramen every night, Ethan? Oh, right. You were in trouble again and Mom and Dad were spending my money to bail you out. That wasn't my fault. I didn't ask them to spend $400,000 of my money keeping you out of prison? You're right. You didn't ask. You just accepted it. And you never once told me the truth. We're a family, he said, his voice breaking. We're supposed to stick together. Then maybe you should have thought about that before letting them rob me blind. Maybe you should have been the bigger person and told me what was happening. But you didn't because you were protecting yourself. So don't call me and talk about family. You don't know what that word means. I hung up and blocked the number. My hands were shaking. Maya found me 20 minutes later sitting on the floor of my bedroom crying into my knees. Ethan called. That absolute waste of space, Maya muttered, sitting down next to me and pulling me into a hug. What did he say? I told her everything and she listened without interruption, just holding me while I cried out years of accumulated pain. You know what the worst part is? I said when I finally ran out of tears. I miss them. Even after everything, I miss having parents. I miss calling my mom when something good happens. I miss asking my dad for advice. I miss believing I had a family who loved me. You do have family who loves you, Maya said firmly. You have Grandpa Arthur. You have me. You have the family you choose. It's not the same. No, it's better. Because we chose you knowing exactly who you are and we love you anyway. They had you by default and still chose to hurt you. So, yeah, it's not the same. It's better. The nonprofit project started almost by accident. I was having coffee with another young woman, Sophia, who worked in Grandpa Arthur's accounting department. She mentioned she was helping her younger sister, Natalie, navigate a situation where their uncle had stolen their aunt's life insurance payout that was supposed to go to Natalie. I wish there was someone who could help her, Sophia said. She's only 19 and she has no idea how to fight back against family. A light bulb went off in my head. What if there was? I said slowly. What if we created a resource specifically for people in situations like that? Sophia's eyes widened. That would be amazing. Do you think it's possible? I don't know, but let's find out. I pitched the idea to Maya that night. Her background was in social work, and she immediately saw the potential. There's nothing like this, she said, pulling up her laptop and doing rapid-fire searches. There are resources for domestic mistreatment, for elder abuse, for financial fraud by strangers, but nothing specifically addressing financial mistreatment within families. This could actually help people. We spent the next 3 months researching and planning. Grandpa Arthur connected us with attorneys, accountants, and social workers who volunteered their expertise. We drafted a business plan, secured initial funding from Grandpa Arthur and several of his wealthy friends, and filed for nonprofit status. The first office was tiny, just 2 rooms above a coffee shop, but it was ours. We named it the Grace Evelyn Foundation for Financial Justice after my grandmother. She'd love this, Grandpa Arthur said at the small opening ceremony, his voice thick with emotion, using her gift to protect others. This is exactly what she would have wanted. Our first client was Sophia's sister, Natalie. She was small and scared, sitting in our office with documents stuffed into a grocery bag. I don't know what to do, she said, tears streaming down her face. My uncle says I'm being selfish, that the money should stay in the family, but it was my mom's life insurance. She meant for me to go to college with it. Maya and I exchanged glances. We'd heard this story before because we'd lived versions of it ourselves. You're not being selfish, I told Natalie gently. Your mother wanted you to have that money. Your uncle stole it, and we're going to help you get it back. The asset seizure happened 3 weeks later. Their house, which they'd somehow managed to keep despite multiple mortgages, was sold at auction. The entire process from seizure to sale took 6 weeks total. Their cars were repossessed. Bank accounts were frozen and drained. Dad's failing business was liquidated. They ended up moving into a cheap apartment on the other side of town, both working retail jobs to survive. Ethan stopped calling me after I made it clear I wasn't interested in his opinions about family loyalty. I threw myself into work and slowly started to rebuild. Grandpa Arthur helped me invest the settlement money I did receive from the asset seizures, about $300,000 total. It wasn't the original amount, but it was enough to start my own nonprofit with Maya, focusing on financial literacy and fraud prevention for young adults. Teach them to recognize the warning signs, Grandpa Arthur advised. Help them protect themselves from people who'd take advantage of them, even family. The nonprofit took off faster than either Maya or I anticipated. Turns out there were thousands of young people who had been financially mistreated by their families and had nowhere to turn for help. We offered free legal consultations, connected them with trustworthy attorneys, and provided education on protecting their assets. Within 2 years, we helped recover over $8 million for various victims and had expanded to 3 states. I was featured in a Forbes article about young entrepreneurs making a difference. The reporter asked if I'd been inspired by any personal experiences. My grandmother set up a trust fund for me before she passed away, I said carefully. She wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of and could pursue my dreams. That gift changed my life, and I want to help others protect the gifts they've been given. The article never mentioned that my parents had stolen that gift or that I'd had to sue them to get any of it back. Some stories were too personal to share with the world. 3 years after the lawsuit, I received a letter from my mother. It had been forwarded through Daniel Lee's office since she didn't have my current address. The letter was 12 pages long, handwritten, full of apologies and explanations that somehow still managed to make excuses. She talked about the pressure Dad had been under, the fear of losing everything, the desperation that clouded their judgment. She said they'd been going to therapy and had joined a support group for people with gambling problems. Gambling problems. That was new information. She ended the letter begging for a chance to make things right, to rebuild our relationship, to be a family again. I read it once, filed it in a folder with all the legal documents from the case, and never responded. Some bridges once burned should stay that way. Grandpa Arthur asked me once if I regretted pursuing the lawsuit. Never, I said firmly. They made their choices. I just made sure there were consequences. Your grandmother would be proud of you, he said, patting my hand. She set up that trust because she believed in you. She knew you'd do something meaningful with your life. I wish I could thank her, I said, feeling the familiar ache of missing someone I'd lost too young. You do, every day. The work you're doing, the people you're helping, that's the best thank you she could have asked for. On my 30th birthday, Grandpa Arthur took me to the same expensive restaurant where everything had fallen apart 5 years earlier. We sat at a different table, ordered different food, but the memory hung in the air between us. To my favorite granddaughter, he toasted, raising his glass, who turned a betrayal into a mission and became stronger than anyone who tried to break her. I clinked my glass against his. To family you choose, not just the family you're born with. I'll drink to that. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya asking if I'd seen the news. I opened the link she'd sent and felt my blood run cold. Robert and Eleanor Blackwood arrested for fraud and embezzlement in connection with elder abuse case. Multiple victims identified. Investigation ongoing. I showed Grandpa Arthur the article. His expression hardened as he read. They found new targets, he said grimly. According to the article, my parents had been running a scheme targeting elderly people in their apartment complex, offering to help manage their finances and then systematically draining their accounts. They'd apparently stolen nearly $500,000 from 6 different victims before one of the victims' daughters noticed suspicious activity and reported it to the police. They haven't changed at all, I said, feeling oddly vindicated. All those letters about therapy and growth had been lies. They were still the same people who'd stolen from their own daughter, just with new victims. Leopards and spots, Grandpa Arthur murmured. At least this time, they'll face criminal charges. There's no civil settlement that'll save them from this. My parents were sentenced to 8 years in prison each. The sentencing happened 6 months after their arrest. Ethan wrote me a bitter email saying I'd gotten what I wanted, that I destroyed our family. I deleted it without responding. While they served their sentences, the wage garnishment from my civil judgment continued to pull from whatever prison job wages they earned. It amounted to pennies, but the principle mattered. The nonprofit continued to grow. By the time I turned 35, we'd expanded to 15 states and had helped recover over $60 million for financial mistreatment victims. I'd published a book about recognizing and preventing familial financial mistreatment that became required reading in several college business ethics courses. Grandpa Arthur remained my biggest supporter until the day he passed away at 89, peacefully in his sleep after a full day of beating me at chess and complaining about the stock market. His will left me everything with a handwritten note that said, "You were the only one who deserved it. Make your grandmother proud. Love, Grandpa Arthur." I established a scholarship fund in both my grandparents' names for young people who had been victims of financial mistreatment by family members. The first recipient was a girl whose parents had stolen her settlement from a car accident. The second was a young man whose siblings had drained his inheritance from his grandmother. Their stories were my story. We'd all been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect us. We'd all had to rebuild from nothing. We'd all survived. Standing at the scholarship ceremony, watching these resilient young people accept their awards, I thought about that dinner 5 years ago. The shock on my parents' faces when they realized they'd been caught. The sick feeling in my stomach when I learned the truth. The hollow emptiness that followed. Maya squeezed my hand. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, and meant it. "I really am." Because the truth was, my parents hadn't destroyed me. They tried. They'd certainly done their best, but I'd survived. I built a life they could never touch, helped people they'd never care about, became someone they'd never understand. The $3,400,000 they'd stolen had been a gift from my grandmother, meant to give me opportunities and security. They'd taken that gift and nearly broken me with a betrayal. But I'd taken that betrayal and built something they never could have imagined, an empire of advocacy, a network of survivors, a legacy of protection for the vulnerable. In the end, Grandma Grace's gift had changed my life, just not the way anyone expected. And that was a thank you I could live with. What would you have done in my shoes?